Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I thought I'd spend a few minutes today talking about where we're at after the end of the session. There were about 60 bills that passed during the last 2 weeks of the session. And as you know, at that time of year, things can change quickly or be added at the last minute without much notice. So as is typical, I won't be making any specific decisions on individual bills until we receive and review them, using the 5 days I have to take action. And just for awareness, I don't have any bills on my desk at this point. Legislative Council will take whatever time they need to review the bills and get signatures from legislative leaders before I start getting bills, and they typically come in batches. That's a long way of saying you shouldn't expect any action this week or early next week. Taking a step back, in January, I presented a budget to the legislature that was balanced, prioritized Vermonters and communities, helped make Vermont more affordable with tax relief, and made investments in shared priorities like childcare, climate change mitigation, infrastructure, workforce, and more. The good news is the legislature included funding for most of those initiatives. The bad news is they spent a lot more money than I proposed and relied on regressive taxes and fees to fund the added spending, which I believe is unsustainable given the economic uncertainty ahead of us. As I've repeatedly said, we can make historic progress on our shared goals without increasing costs on already overburdened Vermonters. What I put forward was sustainable, something we can afford next year and into the future. And we can expand on those shared goals if we have organic revenue to fill those coffers. I've been clear. I'm ready and willing to work with legislators to find the right balance between their approach and mine, because that's what Vermonters elected us to do. As I said in my adjournment address, a majority of Vermonters voted for me in the last election in every single town, while also electing them. Vermonters voted for balance and expected us to work together. But they've also been loud and clear with me that they didn't think Vermont was affordable even before this legislative session. That's why I have serious concerns about the financial impacts of what they passed. Between a $100 million payroll tax, $20 million in DMV fees, $30 million in property tax pressure, at least $180 million in potential clean heat mandates, that works out to roughly $1,200 per household per year. I worry about everyday Vermonters already facing cost increases due to inflation. I worry about lower-income single moms who won't significantly benefit from what was passed this year, but will pay more in taxes and fees to help families with higher incomes. Or the seniors on fixed incomes who are already living on the edge and won't see any benefits, but will face higher costs. Now, it's no secret I have some disagreement with the approach lawmakers have taken, so I'll once again make this appeal, which you in the press are now familiar with. We share the same goals. We both support making historic investments in shared priorities, but I believe we must do it in a way Vermonters can afford. We have 5 weeks between now and when they come back at the end of June. Vermonters want us to work together, and I'm ready to do just that. So, with that, I'll open up to questions.
In your goodbye speech to the House and Senate, you reiterated some of your concerns with the legislation as it relates to spending, revenues, and you said in this quest for balance, you hope that they will join you in this upcoming veto session to deliver that. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's two paths forward for them. They can seek to override my veto, which they've shown that they can successfully do, or they can work with us to try and find some middle ground, work together to compromise both sides, giving some in order to do what I could find palatable. And they could as well. So that's the outreach.
So you said at the outset, still got to look at the bills, haven't arrived at my desk yet, but it does sound like you anticipate vetoing some significant pieces of legislation?
There are a number of bills I have concerns with, and again, we'll take a look at all those and put them together, and I'll have to prioritize as well. I can't veto everything, so I'll just have to make some decisions over the next couple of weeks.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
How productive, you've been around many sessions, how productive do you think this session was, fees and taxes aside, I mean, in terms of the legislation that was passed, how productive do you think it was?
I guess it depends on your standpoint. From my perspective, I think it did a lot of harm and could potentially do a lot of harm to everyday Vermonters. From their perspective, I think they had a mandate when they came in, and they were going to move forward with that mandate, and they did so successfully. So, again, I guess it depends on your perspective.
How do you reconcile the two mandates? You were elected every town, and the people of Vermont elected, in theory anyway, veto-proof majorities in both chambers.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it. They didn't do so knowingly or collectively. Each district elected their representative. Now, I don't know as any of them said, we're going to go in and veto everything, or override everything the governor vetoes, and we don't expect you to listen to anything the governor has to say. I just think that they expected us to work together, and from my perspective, I have a full view of the state. Theirs is narrower than mine, and again, when you have a supermajority and have the power and a lot of cash because of the surpluses that we have, it gives you the sense of being able to deliver. And it's not. I know Governor Cooper is facing the same thing in North Carolina today. The opposite. He's a Democrat, and he's facing a supermajority, and they overturned his veto as well.
You mentioned when you were speaking about the young single mother. Wouldn't the young single mother be able to benefit from the child care?
Well, they already are, and they're not getting any increase, right? So there's a certain level of poverty. I think it's 150% at this point, 200%, whatever the figure is. I'm thinking of that single mom who's already receiving child care and not paying for it. They aren't going to get any more than they get today, but they will have to pay for it, because if they're working, they'll be paying a payroll tax.
We have a single mother who's at 165% of federal poverty level. Now she does get free child care.
Yeah, and that's, and that's why my bill that I put forward included went up to almost 400% poverty level. So that would include them within existing resources and not having any payroll tax. So, again, I've said we're all going to have to compromise if they're willing, and if that means going a little bit more. But the long-range goal is, I agree with them. I think we should have more, but we have to do it at a pace we can afford.
You stopped just short of saying that you plan to veto the budget, but you're also speaking as if, it's all but certain that there's still an opportunity for them to reopen it, which there wouldn't be if you signed it into law or let it pass into law without your signature. Can we assume that you're going to veto the budget?
Well, there's other ways of accomplishing that, and I don't have to get into all the intricacies, but there are other areas of concern, and once you open up one bill, you can counteract what you've done in another. So there's ways of crafting legislation to take care of something without opening up the budget. But again, I'm not saying I'm going to or not going to. We're just going to take a look at all of them to find a path forward.
You said there's no bills on your desk right now. I thought you had the biodiversity bill. Am I wrong about that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I've signed everything that's come to my desk thus
When
far.
you rate this year's, it seems this philosophical difference between you and the legislature is not really new. although there are the new powers, if you will, of the legislature. How would you rate this in your, what year is this? 6 years as governor, this, where we are right now?
They've all been different, obviously, but I would counter that, we don't, our differences aren't philosophical, because I'm in favor of increasing childcare. I'm in favor of doing more. I'm in favor of paid family leave. It's just our approach and how we do it and the pace at which we do it is of disagreement. So I don't know if that's philosophical, but I'm a fiscal conservative. I've been in business a long time. I've been governor now for this my 7th year. I've been in the legislature for a number of years before that. I've seen some downturns in the economy. I've experienced that in business. I know how difficult it is when that happens, and it happens quickly. And I don't know as everyone in the legislature has experienced that. And all they've seen thus far, for some, are the good times. We've had a surplus. We brought forward a surplus in the state budget for the first time in a decade over the last 3 or 4 years. We didn't have that before because we were rebounding from that economic downturn. So again, I think it's the experience that I've had and knowing what I do and knowing how difficult it is to make those cuts leads me to want to walk before you run, and they're going from 0 to 60 in one session.
Acknowledging you haven't had an opportunity to review the legislation yet, how do you feel in concept about this idea of expanding the bottle redemption universe in order to increase the amount of recycled?
I've been opposed to that bill since I first heard about it and throughout my legislative life. I think what we put forth decades ago worked, and it was a good step forward. But now we have something all different with the recycling, zero sort, and so forth, and I think we should be focusing on that. I'm not saying we give up on bottle redemption in its entirety, but to grow it to this degree, I think is going to have some consequences, workforce and otherwise, that we're not contemplating at this point. And I think it's the wrong approach. I think we should be focusing on recycling.
One of the arguments in favor of the legislation that would increase future legislatures' pay was that the current pay scale is just too paltry to allow regular Vermonters, for lack of a better word, to get into public service. Do you think there's merit to that argument?
I think there's some merit, and I've been vocal about that as well. What I hear from when I'm trying to encourage someone to run for office, they typically ask me, well, how much time does it take? And what am I going to have to do? How long is the session? And I have to answer honestly because it's open-ended. Don't know. It can be, I've been in here into June in one of our sessions when I was in the legislature. And so there's no set time limit. And that's been the biggest deterrent in terms of trying to encourage people to run. The pay for some is an issue, and I've said if you want to raise the pay, that's fine, but you have to reduce the length of the session and have some finality to that so that they can plan for when they are going to be here and for how long, so they can get back to their normal lives and back to their own jobs and be able to tell their employers how long they're going to be on.
So 2 weeks from today, I know we've gotten your standpoint on this before, but the hotel motel program will kind of go back to its expanded version. And city and town managers I've talked to just as recently as yesterday kind of have no idea what they're going to do with these influx of people coming back. I guess just do you have any message or anything you'd want to kind of tell local municipality leadership? Yeah,
we're all in this together, and it's something that we're not sitting on our hands waiting for the date to arrive before doing anything. We're trying to make arrangements at this point. It's permanent housing is the answer, and want to reiterate that every dollar that we spend for the hotel motel program is money that we won't be able to utilize for permanent housing typically. So we should be putting more money. As you know, we put forward an initiative of $15 million for the VHIP program. Now the VHIP program has been probably one of the most successful programs we've initiated. And I don't think Vermonters have a great idea of what that means. Because if you have a home and you want to add an accessory dwelling, or you have an apartment that needs upgrading so you can rent it out, there's grants available for up to $50,000 with some stipulations attached. Now, we've only been doing this for a year or two at this point, and we put 500 and something units online for less than $50,000 per unit. When you compare that to the money we put forward, and again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done what we've done, but when we put it into bigger projects, we're talking, $250,000 or more in terms of per unit cost, and it takes a lot longer. So the pace at which we are able to react is going to be part of the answer. So that's one area that I would like them to, instead of cutting our request by $5 million, I think they at this point in time should expand upon that. And we're just going to have to continue to survey those who are involved in the hotel motel program to find out what plans they've made, if they've made any, what issues they have, and we're doing just that every single day. And I might ask Secretary Samuelson if she has anything she could add to that at this point.
Governor, thank you. I want to echo the sentiments about the VHIP program. We know that on a quarterly basis, they're putting as many as 100 units online in that program, and that really does make a difference for the Vermonters who've been in our hotel and motel programs who have access to those. We know that there are Vermonters who have housing vouchers right now and are not able to access permanent housing. We are committed to working with the towns and have begun and are actively engaging in conversations and discussions, and will continue those with the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns tomorrow. Again, want to echo that continuing to put money in the hotel and motel program isn't necessarily getting us to the permanency that many of the individuals need in that program.
Secretary Samuelson, what's the latest, most accurate number on the number of individuals that are going to be exited on June 1? And the governor said you've been surveying them, talking with them. How many of those individuals have you been able to confirm will have housing to transition to when they leave those motel rooms?
We know a significant proportion of them actually have an alternative plan. We talked about that last time that we were here. It's a dynamic population, so I don't want to get down to the finite or infinite number that have an alternative plan. But we do know that there's a significant proportion that do and are waiting until the program ends to implement that plan.
Significant. I mean, are you tracking this? Like, do you have data on this? Is there a spreadsheet where you're keeping track of each individual and finding out what the plan is?
I'm happy to get back with you on that, but we are meeting actively, engaging in case management and care management with each individual and their families that would like to engage in that process, and so I can get back to you.
In the number of individuals that will lose eligibility beginning June 1?
It's a dynamic number, so let me go ahead and I'll get those details back to you.
Dynamic number, does that mean that you haven't fully decided who's going to be eligible and who's not going to be eligible? Are there still decision points ahead that are going to be determinative as to whether or not somebody can stay in their motel or hotel room?
No, I think that's an inaccurate statement. It means that there are individuals who are coming and going from the program on a daily basis. Letters went out to program individuals at the beginning of the month that will be exiting on June 1, and I get you the number of those letters following the press conference.
I was struck by the number of families who had Section 8 vouchers that weren't able to find any. I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I was struck by just the sheer number. And that's what led me to believe that we need to do a better job in trying to promote the VHIP program. And you could all help with that as well, to try to get the word out, and we can identify, just point them our way, so that we can get them, if they have that would help them as well. For some struggling families trying to pay their property taxes, this would be another approach to helping supplement that as well. The other part of that was the number of people, not a great number, but there's a number of people in the hotel motel program that would qualify for senior living of some sort. And they just aren't quite ready to give up their independence, but they would qualify for that. So we're actively pursuing that as well.
Senior living, those facilities are pretty maxed out too, right? I mean,
well, we're
I
seeing
heard
some.
from
We're
a
seeing
resident
some.
who was like, I'd be desperate to be in one of those facilities, but there's nowhere for me to go.
Well, interestingly enough, we're finding that there's some opening in that program. And again, I'm going to ask Secretary Samuelson to chime in. There are some struggles in certain areas, but there are certain areas that have beds available.
Yeah, but if you repeat the question, I couldn't hear it on the phone.
It was about my comment about senior living, and that the question was if there is no bed capacity. Maybe you could repeat the question so I don't get it wrong,
I guess
or the
what is
statement.
your understanding of what the new bed capacity is, given that the general understanding is that's pretty maxed out. There was some money in the budget that's, hoping to increase reimbursement rates, which hopefully will increase capacity. But, I mean, how many new beds do you think will be available for the significant population of elderly people who are in these motels? Do we have any sense?
Yeah, so I want to be clear, there are a number of individuals who are older adults who would qualify for other levels of care, who are right now, as the governor said, considering whether now is the time to give up their independence. For those who would qualify for skilled nursing, which I believe is what you're asking about, there are beds across the state that are open. We track that on a regular basis. It fluctuates as many as 100 beds at any given time. I think what you're referring to is the capacity needs that we have, and particularly the discharge from the hospitals. And while we found that to be challenging, that's often because of the specific needs of those individuals needing a higher level of care. So I do want to say that there are beds available. They're available across the state. The state has also worked with and is currently working with a vendor to bring on higher need beds for those who might have mental health, substance use, correctional histories. They currently are not able to find a location, and that'll come on right around the time. So it's slotted to come on in July, and there'll be 100 beds there that will also be able to be prioritized for populations who have higher needs and can't go to one of the currently available beds.
Can I also ask one more clarifying question? I'm a little bit confused by your statements earlier about there being a plan to kind of survey and figure out how many of these people do have a plan. Because when I asked DCF about this a few weeks ago, this was an on-the-record interview, I published these comments, I asked specifically this question, and I was told because the population is transient, I don't even think that kind of survey is possible. So has that changed? Is there now going to be an actual systemic effort to figure out how many of these people that are exiting are going to have some sort of, if not permanent housing, shelter, or, are we going to get some sort of census?
Yeah, I'm happy to get folks back in touch with DCF. Since October, we've had a cross-agency team that has been working with individuals to do care management and case management to assess what their needs are and to help them identify a plan and move on to permanent housing. That's included a nurse, it's included someone who is specialized in helping people find employment, It's included someone who is specialized in helping navigate economic services, as well as the housing partners on the ground. And through that project, we have been assessing the needs and the plans of individuals who are currently in our hotel program. Again, with the primary focus to help them identify and find a permanent solution and provide them the appropriate supports to do so.
Well, the question isn't, are there case managers talking to these folks, but is there an attempt to gather data that will be publicly available that tells us, of the 2,500 people who left within this 2-month period, 50% found a shelter bed, 10% got permanent shelter. So is there going to be that data, right, that tells us where these people went? That's different than whether or not you're talking to them and trying to identify.
Yeah, thank you. I think that before what I heard your question is, are we currently tracking individuals that are currently in the program? As individuals exit the housing programs, we will continue to look at and monitor the broader Agency of Human Services data, but as they exit, we may not have their individuals. We may not have access to where they go and what their plans are once they're no longer involved in programs of the Agency of Human Services.
Thank you. And on this subject, I have one more question for the governor. As I'm sure you know, there's this group of Democrats that are, did not vote for the budget because of this issue, and like you, they're hoping that legislative leaders reopen the budget somehow. Of course, they're coming at it from the opposite direction. Has that at all affected your calculus about whether or not you should sign or veto this budget bill, right?
It's not that I'm not aware of that, but I'm going to look at the glass a little bit differently for those who would look at that and might say, well, you better not veto the bill. The budget could get worse. That's what they're getting at. And I would say that if we could get to a point where we could agree and make the bill more palatable, that we'd actually gain numbers on the Republican side in particular. So for all those who are going to vote against it, no matter what, if we made it better from my perspective, I think we could gain enough votes to make it viable.
So you're saying if you veto, which you're not
Right.
absolutely planning to, but if you do, right, Republicans might
If we could,
join on the other side.
exactly. So it's a dynamic. You can look at it a couple of different ways.
Right.
One of the things we haven't talked about much, but that I know is really important to a lot of people, and some significant money behind it, is this SALT workaround. Did not make it across the finish line, and I'm wondering your thoughts, reactions to the fact
Yeah,
that
I think it's unfortunate that it didn't, because it really doesn't affect our budget and would put money in the pockets of many folks from a federal level. So I'm scratching my head a bit as to why it didn't make it. But.
Governor, speaking of federal money, as you know, the debt ceiling talks are ongoing in Washington. It seems like one of the places that there has been some agreement is for the federal government to claw back unused pandemic COVID cash. Will that affect us in any way?
We don't believe so. It's always a concern because you never know what they're going to claw back, and that's why I kept advocating for, even with the IIJA money and other money that we're going to be utilizing in the future, that we make sure that we have the match, because once they'll start clawing back other money as well to fill gaps. So we want to make sure that it's committed. We believe that we're in good shape there. We have programs in place. It is committed. It hasn't all gone out the door, but it's all committed. So depending on how they structure the verbiage, I think we're okay, as long as it's committed to use and not actually gone to the end user.
I don't know if you would know where Commissioner Gresham is on, I don't see him, but about how much money is allocated but not yet spent. I don't know if we can get that number.
Kristen.
Yeah. Kristen, Secretary Clauser?
Sure, Governor. I believe it's just over $480 million that's obligated but not expended. But I can follow up with the exact number as well.
Thank you.
So yesterday, the special committee was officially announced, kind of person by person, who's going to be a part of it for the Franklin County investigations. And I know it all starts in the House, but considering its rarity, I guess how in the loop are you expecting to be throughout this whole process, just kind of hands off?
I don't think I'll be involved whatsoever, other than answering some of your questions. But this is it's in the House at this point, and they'll have to do their investigation and come to some conclusion, and then vote on that if they choose to do so.
A narrative, I guess, a through line. You still have a lot of decisions to make, as you said, but a through line with leaders in both chambers these last couple of weeks of the session is essentially the governor's either vetoing or is going to veto a record amount of bills, more than any other governor in the state. That's what they've been telling me, at least. And I guess your response to that, you mentioned just the inexperienced lawmakers, they've only been here for the good times, a lot of this federal windfall, but just, I don't know if you have a response to that or kind of a rationale behind why this year might be different than the past.
I think, this is a record year of spending as well. Record year of increase in base budget expansion. I think it's at 13%. I don't think we've ever seen that. So, maybe there's a correlation between spending and vetoes. I don't know. We'll see.
You spoke a lot on the 72-hour waiting period as well. That's going to hit your desk. I know you said you don't want to make any final decisions, but just in concept, in the next couple of weeks here, do you foresee vetoing that bill?
Again, it's on the table. We'll wait and see when we get it, and I'll make a decision at that point.
But your thought process hasn't changed on
No.
that?
Go to the phones, starting with Guy Page, Vermont Daily Chronicle.
Thank you, Governor. So my question is, Governor Mike Donahue reported today that Vermont Judge Allison Arms was considering releasing an 18-year-old accused of armed robbery and drug possession, saying it's not her fault that the state doesn't have a secure youth facility. The town of Newberry now has the support of Senator Kitchell in this opposition to the state plan to open a facility there. When and where can Vermonters expect?
Yeah, I think you cut off at the end there, Guy, but I think I have the flavor of the question. We are working on other initiatives. Southern Vermont Medical Center is one. There's another in Windham County with the Sheriff's Office. So we are working on a couple of other ways to approach this. And we'll wait. I haven't made any decision. We haven't made any decision on Newberry at this point. It's in the Supreme Court and on a technicality in terms of the restrictions place or the power of the town. So we'll wait and see how that all works out before making a decision to go from there.
Can you tell me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about the South Vermont Medical Center and the Windham County Sheriff's Office's concepts?
I can't in detail. I don't know if Secretary Samuelson has anything more on that or can research that and get back to Guy.
I'm happy to work with you and DCF to get information back to you. What the governor is referring to at Southwest Medical Center is an expansion of their services to include an adolescent mental health beds that will be available. And it really depends on the need of the individual youth or child. The second, for the Windham County Sheriff's Office, is there are really two things that we are talking about that we need in our system of care. One is stabilization. So when a youth is in crisis, there's an opportunity to kind of take a time out and stabilize, and then determine where a best longer-term residential placement is. And so that identifies the second piece that's needed in our system, which is that longer-term residential option. What we're talking about at the Windham County Sheriff's is that opportunity to do the stabilization before we move a youth on to residential treatment, like you might see in Newberry. I will say that we continue to try to work with towns and look for partnerships across the state. What I can say is that in the past we've stepped forward and asked towns and providers to come forward and help us find what is needed for Vermont's children. And we haven't, no one has, and with each of the towns that we work with, there always is some reason that they come forward why it's not what they want in their yard. And so I really would ask Vermont towns, Vermont villages to really consider what is the right thing and where can we site the facilities that we need for our highest risk children and youth.
So what happens now, there's this 18-year-old kid, the feds picked him up, but say they hadn't, and the judge just says, hey, there's no place to put this child, I've got to release him. There's just simply got to be a better alternative than that.
Yeah, again, I want to look to working with our cities and towns to ensure that we have both stabilization and residential treatment for Vermont youth. And so we'll continue to work through that. In the absence of that, it's really falling to state employees. And so I can't dig into this individual case, but again, we'll continue to look for and explore opportunities to do the right thing for Vermont children.
Thank you.
Tom Davis, Compass Vermont.
Thanks, Jason. Governor, amongst that pile of bills that you have to consider, where is that housing S-100 bill on that stack?
I think that S-100 isn't exactly what we wanted. We would have preferred having more expansion in terms of Act 250 reform and regulatory reform, but it's still a good bill, and barring any technical issues with the bill, that would probably go through. But we'll take a look at it when it gets.
So after examination, if it looks okay, you're tending to sign it?
Yeah, anything will help at this point with housing.
Great. Thank you. No further questions.
If Barbara joined, honored. No. Any others in the room?
Just a quick follow-up to Guy Page's line of questioning. Is your administration still advocating for a pause in the raise the age reforms?
Yeah, I mean, our feelings haven't changed on that issue.
I know Department of Taxes was looking into whether or not Vermont would be able to assess a payroll tax on people who reside here but work remotely for companies based out of state. Have you got any clarification on that question?
I might refer to Commissioner Bolio.
Yeah, I'm here, Governor. Thanks, Pete, for that question. Our read of the current bill is that if you live in Vermont, work in Vermont for a non-Vermont employer, you would be subject to that payroll tax. And so the law would say that that employer would have to collect that payroll tax on your behalf.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Sure.
Governor, what do you make of the Supreme Court's kind of impact on this session? Obviously, the Shield bill is responding to the abortion decision, and the Bruin case, a lot of legislators brought that up in terms of legislation they could even introduce or picked up this year. Just your thoughts on this report.
Well, again, it's putting more pressure, maybe more authority, giving it to the states, which is for some have always advocated for that, and I think that we've reacted appropriately. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.